Welcome, Charles.
Thanks.
What I'd like to do today is just discuss Titus and just tell me your title and just tell me your background and what it is that you do for Titus.
I am the executive director of Titus. We're in our 25th season. So it was co-founded by two gentlemen, Tom Adams and Mr. Leggett. And they, well, one gentleman passed away. Tom Adams is certainly still alive. He retired, and they did a national search, and I was hired. I was at that time living in New York, working as the producer at the World Trade Center. I'm from Texas, but I moved back to Texas for Titus. And we are the presenter of international and American music and dance, usually a little left of center. Half our season is music, half our season is dance. People think of us as a dance presenter because it's, you know, there are more nights of dance. When we bring a company in, we'll do 2 or 3 nights, where when we bring a music artist in, it's for 1 night. And then we'll do several special events, like a big ballet gala, special events like Kathy Griffin, and in January we're doing Patti LuPone. We'll add those things into our season. So we're a presenter, and that's what I do. And I'm responsible for booking all the talent and for running the company.
Okay. Can you tell me what type of talent, as far as dance is concerned, what type of talent have you brought in the past, and what type of talent are you bringing in the future?
You know, it covers the gambit. We do Momix regularly, David Parsons, Bill T. Jones, Arnie Zane Dance Company. We're doing Merce Cunningham in the coming season. American Ballet Theater, Lyon Opera Ballet from France, Ballet Biarritz from France, Le Ballet Jazz de Montreal, now called BJM Dance. Margie Gillis, Baryshnikov's White Oak Project. God, you name it, we brought it in. I always say that, you know, when people ask what kind of dance or artist do we present, and I typically say that we don't do cats and we don't do river dance. And it's not that those aren't great art forms. They're terrific for their genre. It's a little bit more mainstream than what we do. Like I say, we tend to be a little bit more left to center. When people come to Titus events, they know they're coming to see something different.
Okay. Do you actively search out companies nationally and internationally, or do you try to keep it within the United States?
No. We're very international. Typically, in any one season, we'll have artists from 6 to 10 countries, just depending on the year. Usually, it's an average of 6 or 7 countries in our season. And I will travel a lot. I'll go to the booking conferences. There's a big one in every January that all of us, thousands of us, go to from around the world. It's held in New York every January. It's 5 days of arts hell. You know, you're literally going to shows from 8 in the morning till 4 in the morning, and meetings and going through exhibit booths, and a lot of booking happens there. I'd spent this summer in France. The French consulate sent me over to look at French companies, and so I went over there and looked at those, and I went to Canada this year to look at a company that we're considering for next year, and I got invited to Israel to go look at companies there, and I've tabled that trip. But so there's a lot of travel, a lot of looking at tapes. You know, after you've been in the business for a long time, you get used to evaluating tapes. I tend to try to have the bulk of the season of the next year's season finished before I go to the booking conference. And the reason for that is that it changes the dynamics of the dialogues that you have at these conferences. You can then really sort of relax in your chair and talk about cool ideas of interesting projects to present, as opposed to the hard sell of, you know, well, let's put this artist in this, you know, in September of your upcoming season. And they're so focused on trying to fill their calendar. If I go there completed, then everybody sort of sits back and talks about really great projects that are in the process of being made.
Now, is there a company that you've brought in that tends to be more popular than any other, that you've gotten more response from?
Sure. Momix is always a giant crowd favorite. You know, Momix is a modern dance company that is very prop-oriented. They do, what I like about them, they're very similar to like Pilobolus. You know, they were actually the same company at one time. They reinvent themselves all the time. Moses Pendleton, who's the artistic director, one of the projects that we did was Opus Cactus, and it was a full-length evening piece. And he went and lived in the desert for three or 4 months and just observed the flora and fauna of the desert. And then the entire piece was based on that experience. And he actually went out there and did that. And so the piece is really interesting. It's very simple, but very beautiful. The new work that he's working on right now is based on the sex life of plants and the sexual organs of plants, and this amazing book of photography of the sexual organs of plants, and that would be like pollen and the stamens and whatnot of various plants. And it's very beautiful and very bizarre. You know, these are microscopic images, and that's what his next piece will be based on his reaction to that imagery. So they're always really, really interesting. You know, of course, American Ballet Theater, when we brought them, they hadn't been here in 30 years. It was a big seller. Right. Even with the ballet company, though, I was very specific that we did not want a story ballet. We wanted a contemporary program. So they still did Balanchine and other works and famous works, but it wasn't like Sleeping Beauty or you know, Romeo and Juliet. And that was in deference to supporting our local companies that were doing that kind of work. I wanted something different. But certainly I would say Momix is the biggest one that people come to.
Could you tell me a little bit about the audience? And do you feel like you have an outreach to all types of audience members in the dance community, or outside the dance community that would draw in people that have never seen dance before?
Yeah, you know, I think that Titus is in particularly known for its diversity on and off the stage. Because we bring in so many international acts, our audience is very diverse and very cross-cultured audiences. In other words, we have a lot of people that attend our music events that also attend our dance events. And certainly when we bring in specific artists, we'll get a higher percentage of a specific audience. When we bring in Ravi Shankar or Nrittaram, this very famous Indian dance group, we'll have a larger Indian population. But then those people will come and they'll see the programs and they'll see, oh, this looks like a really interesting show, so they start coming to other events. And so we have a very ethnically diverse audience. From a dance audience perspective, it varies. I think we probably have the most diverse audience in terms of cross disciplines, but there are people that, you know, really want to see ballet, and people that really want to just see, you know, the Paul Taylors or the Momixes. But in our case, I think that, again, people come to Titus because they know they're going to see something different. So we tend to have a little bit left of center audience because what we present is left of center. So they're usually a lot more often. My favorite audience member is, the best example is a particular woman named Mrs. Weil, who she's in her 70s and she comes to everything. And we were doing a concert with, I want to say it was Steve Reich. She comes to the full dance you know, season, but she comes to the music as well. And she walked out at intermission and she said, you know, it's not my cup of tea, but I think it's great that you brought them. And I love that, and I'm fine with the fact that she walked out. I just love that she came and experienced it and decided it wasn't for her, and she left, but she still bought the next season's tickets. That's a great audience member.
That must be very exciting for you to be able to reach out and to tap into other people's interests, and they may not even know they have an interest in that, or they may not even have an idea of that type of genre.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the plus. The minus is that, you know, you also get the hate mail. This was too contemporary, this was too edgy, I thought this was too loud. We always have issues about the sound because the theater that we present in currently is acoustically really hot. And so it's hard to balance the sound. And, you know, and I respond to every one of those letters that we get. I mean, that's sort of my job, is to be the good cop, bad cop. So I will, and I really appreciate the negative stuff too. I mean, sure, you want to be praised, but you learn more from the negative letters than you do the positive letters. You really do. So I always respond when a patron writes in or emails me that they had a problem with the performance.
That's great. Now, we started talking about ballet and modern. What I'd like to do is have you define ballet and also have you define modern. So to the general audience member, how would you describe each one of those genres?
Well, you know, classical ballet, in most people's minds, started really with Louis XIV. who was the great patron of ballet. In actuality, it really started in Rome, in the Roman pantomimes, way before. But it really became a true art form under Louis XIV, and was a big patron, and really supported it. And the Russians became very involved, started touring. Two major schools really started to form, and that's where really everything started. In the early 1900s, there's a big revolution that started happening, and it really started in America, which is the emergence of modern dance. And from that, the postmodern era and contemporary dance, which is where my heart lies. I absolutely appreciate ballet, but I came from the modern world, and so I love the freedom that modern does and the idea of breaking rules. Ballet has gone under a big metamorphosis. For a lot of people, for a long time, ballet was all about the romantic ballets, which is what was really done in France, based on mythological stories. Always, there's always a prince, there's always some damsel in distress, and lots of pantomiming and beautiful footwork, and that's, where that is. Ballet has now really, really morphed in today's world to include a lot of contemporary work. There are a lot of modern choreographers, Twyla Tharp, David Parsons, Lar Lubavitch, Cunningham to some degree. All these guys have been choreographing on major, major ballet companies. I don't think there's a major company in the world today that doesn't have modern works in their repertory. And so the lines are blurring between what is ballet and what is modern. Especially when you look at people like Billy Forsythe, the great American choreographer that is in Germany. Mm-hmm. And his work is very ballet trained. It's a ballet company in many respects, but it's also a modern company. So for me, when I bring in ballet, I want them to do ballet works, important works, but I want it to be more contemporary than going to see a story ballet, mm-hmm. a full-length story ballet. We do a very high-end ballet gala every year, and it's sort of a balancing act with your audience. There's an audience, a portion of an audience that just wants to see pure classical ballet. They want the Don Q pas de deux, grand pas de deux. They want Tchaikovsky pas de deux. They want Swan Lake, White Swan, Black Swan, all the regulars. And for me, I have a problem with it, that it's like a hologram of the same show year after year after year, mm-hmm. city after city. So I always interject one or two modern pieces in there. And I will usually ask each of the ballet couples, do something classical and something more contemporary, so that there's a balance. And I find year after year that though there is an audience that always wants the classical, what everyone remembers is the modern. Mm-hmm. Everyone always says, oh my God, that guy that did Caught, which is a famous piece of David Parsons with the strobe light, and you only ever see the dancer really when they're flying in the air, so it looks like they're flying. That's what they remember. So it's always a balancing act. You have to take the good with the bad, and my role as a presenter is to find that balance. It's a balance between making people happy, staying true to your mission statement being what your company is about. For us, it's about presenting really great art, and it's not, which more times than not means that you're not going to make a lot of money mm-hmm. on your shows, but you find you supplement that with fundraising. So for me, I love ballet because it's such a great art form, and I don't think the general public, realize how difficult it is. But my heart is in contemporary ballet and modern dance.
How do you see the major dance companies, New York City Ballet, American Ballet Theater, approach their classical repertory as opposed to their more contemporary repertory? Do you see you mentioned that they were evolving. Do you mm-hmm. feel like that's across the board around the United States, or do you feel like it's just with the major companies?
No, I think it's across the board. Dance is a really difficult art form right now in America to sell. Everybody loves it, but people don't want to support it as well, and so it's a difficult art form. It's an ongoing national and international discussion with presenters about the difficulty in presenting dance. Everybody wants it, but it's hard to fill the audience. And part of that problem is in and I'll get I'll round myself around to your question. Part of it is the lack of arts education right now. That, you know, when I was in elementary school and high school and junior high, we had regular field trips to the symphony and to the ballet and to museums. And, you know, with the state of education today, a lot of that has gone away. And a lot of the responsibility for that level of arts education has fallen upon organizations like Titus or Texas Ballet Theater or the Opera to create their own educational programs and partner with schools to bring them in, because the school districts are not funding it. So we're entering into a generation of audience members that weren't schooled in education and arts the way I was. But I'm finding that all the ballet companies right now are all adding contemporary works to the repertory. People are wanting something new. I mean, you can see Swan Lake how many times, and Nutcrackers will always be around. You know, I could probably never see a Nutcracker again and be happy. But it is the moneymaker for any ballet company, and you have to have it, and it's a great work. But I think everybody is adding the works. And, you know, my hope is, even though my love is for the contemporary side of things, my hope is that the classical works will never die. They have to be maintained. It's critical. It's a major, you know, it's dance history. It's living history. And I hope that they continue. I don't want to go to them all the time, but I don't want them to go away.
Right. You've spoken about the evolution of ballet from classical, from romantic to classical to contemporary. Can you tell me about the evolution of modern dance? You said it started early in the 1900s or late 1800s. Can you tell me how it started, and can you tell me how it's evolving today?
Well, you know, there's lots of discussion about how it started. There's certainly Ruth St. Denis and Ted Shawn, the Dennis Shawn School, which generated a lot of great, great artists. And of course, Isadora Duncan and the German Mary Wingman, who, you know, their work was based much more, it was almost a religious experience. It created dance as a high art, and it was very based in Grecian statues in the study of, you know, of Nietzsche and that genre of work, where Ted Shawn and Ruth St. Denis were, you know, they used a lot more, in my opinion, a lot more of their body, a different way of expressing, and other art forms, Oriental and African dance influences started generating. And a lot of schools came out of the Dennis Shawn School. Martha Graham, I believe, came out of there. And from, you know, her company, you have Merce Cunningham, one of my favorite artists, and also a great technique to learn, a very difficult technique. You know, and when you look at a Cunningham dancer, it's sometimes hard to differentiate between, you know, if you look at them, they have beautiful leg extensions, beautiful feet, great turnout. And you look at a ballet dancer, beautiful leg extensions, great feet. You know, the difference is in how they use their spine and how they use their space and the vocabulary that's used. In many respects, with ballet, you can physically recite the steps. It's a little bit more difficult in the contemporary modern dance world because there is a morphing of that language that is the basis of what, you know, modern dance came from. So there's a morphing of the vocabulary that came from ballet, and it's continuing to change. The Jetson Church movement changed things yet again when you know, the Deborah Hayes and sitting here on the spot, I always forget all my names, but David Gordon, Deborah Hay, Lucinda Childs. I'm forgetting about a whole bunch of them, but all these people that came out of the Jetson Church movement, that was a non-dance dance movement, and the integration of pedestrian movement as a true art form and a true vocabulary for dance, again, was a new revolution. And I think what's happening today is that you're seeing, with the emergence of things like Cirque du Soleil and all these aerial companies, Bondaloo from San Francisco, and Brendanguel in Argentina, and De La Guarda, the show that went in New York called Villa Villa. All these people that are redefining what is the performance space. You know, right now we're sitting on a stage, and you have the invisible fourth wall that's between the audience and the performer. Those those spaces are being redefined. The wall has been broken down. There are a lot of artists now that are doing studio installations where the audience and the dancers / performers are in the same space. People like Brenda Angiel who are doing, or Elizabeth Streb, ringside, whose her whole motif of movement is based on risk and jump and these trampolines and people leaping off of the scaffolding and they're landing while the other person's already taken off and you're just trusting that they're going to get out of the way in time. It's redefined what is considered dance and what is considered art. And what is considered a performance space has completely changed. And it's a very exciting time. It's an interesting time to be an artist. But you can no longer just go to ballet class and have a career. I mean, some of these people you look at some of the artists that are in MOMICs, and half of them came out of a gymnastic background because they needed the strength to do that kind of work. All of them have had ballet training. Ballet still, no matter what you do, no matter what dancer I ever talk to about the future of their career, whether you really love modern dance or not, you cannot not take ballet. You have to have it. It's the core. But it's all sort of blurring and merging. It's going to be interesting to see where we go down the road. Virtual reality is becoming, a lot of people working with Lifeforms, the software package that Merce Cunningham uses to create his works. And there have been movements towards creating a virtual space, virtual performance space, virtual dancers that are interactive.
Well, I was going to ask you, how does the computer age come into this? Because how many of the new choreographers are really going toward computer imagery or using some type of computer technology to enhance the choreography?
I think a lot of them are starting to explore it more and more. Certainly Merce Cunningham was the groundbreaker in using Lifeforms as a choreographic tool. He builds a lot of his pieces in Lifeforms, which is a software package that does that kind of work. Then there is like the piece, is it called Ghostwriter? Bill T. Jones did this work. It's motion capture technology. And they did a piece, and I want to say it's called Ghostwriter, but it might be Ghost Dancer. It was done at the Cooper Hewitt Center in New York. And Bill went into the studio, and they put all the little balls all over his body, and he does this dance. And they created a virtual dance based on him. And there are several people that are doing that. There's motion capture technology is really evolving, and it's one of the places where it's really evolving is in the idea of dance archiving. There's a lot of discussion going on about the loss of archived materials. Video is not a reliable medium for archiving work. When I was younger and dancing, everyone videoed everything, and that was your archive. Now things are being transferred to DVDs and other mediums because they have a longer shelf life. But in terms of reconstructions of larger pieces, there's been a lot of work on motion capture technology so that you can if you have several dancers or an ensemble doing motion capture technology, where they're all wearing these balls and all their movements being digitized, you could, in theory, move to the back of the space and watching on a screen and see what the dance looks like from the back, so that as a dancer you know that you're not having to reverse everything. And you can figure out where the partnering happens and where the pathways are on the stage. So a lot of that is, this new technology is going towards the science of archiving and how to maintain works. But there are several dancers, choreographers that are starting to integrate new technologies into their work. Some less successfully than others. There are some people that are saying that they're doing virtual reality dance, when in actuality what they're doing is projecting digitized images of something that they worked out on a computer with dancers on stage. For me, that's not virtual reality dance. Virtual reality dance would really be, you would have to have a digitized stage with a dancer that is reacting with the images that are being projected. And everyone in the audience would have to have a screen on their heads, a headset, watching the virtual performance space as a real dancer interacts with whatever imagery is being projected into this. And that's starting to happen, but it's so incredibly cost prohibitive that I don't know that it'll ever tour. But it's starting to happen. And you see it happening on the big movie screen all the time.
Right. Well, let's go back to just define what dance is? We've talked about ballet, we've talked about modern dance. Can you just in an overall description, can you tell me how you would define what dance is?
Dance is everything from everyday movement to the most complicated jeté pirouette combination you could possibly put together. It's hard to define dance as, I think a lot of people would want me to say dance is this great compilation of movements that are based on a certain technique. But Paul Taylor made it, when he came into the scene, a great choreographer in a great company, he really integrated pedestrian movement. Simple. He had a great solo that was very famous where the curtain opened and he stood absolutely motionless. And then the curtain came down. And that was dance. David Gordon did a great piece where he's just walking across the stage. I think one of the hardest things for dancers to do is to walk across the stage. We'd all much rather have a series of steps put together that you can throw your heart and soul into, but just walking is hard to do. Dance is really any kind of expression, I think. There are, very famous forms of dance. Ballet, certainly, jazz and modern and contemporary, now hip-hop. Hip-hop is there are great hip-hop companies now. Rennie Harris out of New York, Pure Movement, has a great company. There's a great company in France, out of Lyon, France, that is a fusion of hip-hop and video, a very good company. But I don't think, I think to try to limit dance to the technical forms of dance it does dance a great disservice. Some of the greatest stuff that's happening in dance right now is happening on the streets. The emergence of hip-hop as a true art form, switching from street dance to concert stage is great. And you look at these shows that I love to make fun of, Dancing with the Stars, and certainly So You Think You Can Dance, which are very good shows, have brought dance back into the households as a household word. And it's breaking down the barriers that people have with it. It's in a great art form. So dance is really any kind of expression, I think, that's based in some kind of movement. There are some great companies out there that are populated by people with special needs. They are wheelchair companies, people who have, there are several companies that are mixed of people that are in and out of wheelchairs, and they're having a great life touring. What's her name in Washington? He'll come back to me. But her company is based on a huge age range. She has 18-year-olds and 82-year-olds in the same. Liz Lerman, and the most famous dancer of all of them in that company is a guy that's 82. He's been, and he's just great. He's terrific on stage.
Well, you mentioned jazz. How would you define? We've talked about ballet. We've talked about modern. How would you define jazz dance?
Oh, that's another one that I think has gotten harder and harder to define. There were certain, I think, motifs and there's an older jazz that we all have studied in dance programs. And I think a lot of jazz moved towards preparing people for musical theater, which is a whole nother thing, and a great business for dancers. I think a lot of people who can't find jobs in a modern company or a ballet company, and they will take it to the musical theater side and go on Broadway or on tour, and you can make great money doing that. Jazz has evolved, from having companies like Danny Borchesky's Jazz Dance, which is probably the one that was known a lot in this country, that toured quite a bit. A lot of them have merged. You see people like Anne Rankin setting pieces for Ballet Hispanico. Is it modern? Is it jazz? Is it jazz because it's Anne Rankin, or is it now a modern piece with jazz motifs because it's on Ballet Hispanico in New York? Jazz dance, I think, today has moved a lot towards what you see on MTV and VH1 and music videos. It has changed the look of jazz. Jazz is now, I think jazz would also, to some degree, include, and I'd probably get shot for this, but it includes forms of hip-hop because it is now a part of the musical video genre. So it too has evolved. And sometimes I watch a jazz company and I go, was that a jazz piece or a modern piece? And frankly, does it really matter? It's just simply being done. I think that, yeah, it's hard to define. I think that you'll see more use of a parallel positioning in jazz than you will see in most modern pieces, and certainly far more so than you would see in the ballet world. But I think it's morphed too. All the lines are blurring.
Mm-hmm. Do you see the same thing happening with musical theater? Because do you see modern and ballet and hip hop? Do you see the influence continuing in musical theater? Do you see musical theater dance as a separated dance form unto itself?
I think it is still blurring, and certainly everyone that is really touring in the musical theater world, on the professional level, they're all ballet modern trained, all of them. And they're all using their backs like someone who's gone through a modern program. They're less rigid. I think, in the musical theater world, there's so many things there's so many challenges right now in the musical theater world. The creation of new work. How often are we going to do revivals? I mean, at some point, it seems like for a while there was all this musical theater being created and created and created, and now we're in this period of revivals. And I was like, okay, what happened to the new work? So I'm waiting for the new works to start really re-emerging. I mean, and this is a personal opinion, but I think that the whole theater world, in particular the music theater world, is evolving. And part of it is trying to figure out where the new works are going to come from. But from a dance perspective, the dancers I know that are in Broadway shows all were in ballet companies or in modern companies, every single one of them. Moving Out was basically in my opinion, it was the evolution of Twyla Tharp's dance company to a Broadway show. I mean, she stepped into this project with Billy Joel, and they created this thing, and the entire cast, barring the core, were Twyla's dancers from her company that I had just presented a month before. So, yeah, those lines are totally blurring. And you see people in these Broadway shows like Moving Out, and they're on point. Mm-hmm. And you didn't used to see that. And they're doing serious dance technique work. I mean, so yeah, it's all blurring. There's still motifs that you would see in musical theater that you're not going to see on the concert stage, because they're performing the songs with words that have meanings in a play, in a book. But in terms of technique, I think there is still a big blurring.
How would you define ritual dance or folkloric dance?
Mm-hmm.
Is there, do you see that as a continuation where we may have seen it in the primitive period and we see it evolving? Do you see it still being promoted today?
We promote it. We regularly do folkloric dance. Typically for us, when we do folkloric dance, it's usually, at least historically, it's been mostly African-based companies coming out of Africa, like Ballet Senegal, very vested in, all their work is tribal work, usually coming with drummers, and it's tribal themes, and it's very enthusiastic. There's still a big market out there for like the Ballet Folklorico Nacional de Mexico, these big Mexican folkloric groups that are doing the Jarabe Tapatíos, the La Bamba, all the great dances from these regions. It's still very popular. Irish step dancing is still very popular, brought to great fame and notoriety by the success of river dance, until it was ruined by Michael Flatley becoming the lord of the dance. But it's still very popular art form, and it's a great art form. For me, it got so commercialized. That's what my problem with it. It's a great art form, and when river dance first came on the scene, I thought this was fantastic. It's such a great art form, but it just became so commercial, and Michael Flatley ran around wearing a headband and his shirt open. It was just a little too much. But there is a market for that, and there is an interest in tribal cultural dance, and we try to do it regularly. But for us, it's usually, I want something that people don't see here as regularly. And so bringing a group in from Africa where it's so spirited and so colorful and so rich in culture, That's what we typically do. But there is a big market for it. And, you know, and that's another art form that you sort of look at that is, it's very human. Where a lot of times I don't think that ballet or modern is as human, in the sense that it's not about how pointed my foot is, or how turned out is my leg, or is my back attitude in the right position, is my knee turned out. It's about expression, and it's not about the technique side of that. So I love that kind of that form of dance a lot.
How do you feel that the internet, as far as YouTube and being allowing people to become so much more accessible to seeing dance that they've never seen before, how do you feel that that is tied into kids today seeing dance for the first time? Do you see that as a positive?
I see it as a positive. It's certainly been a positive for me. You know, I'm not a YouTuber until recently. I'm right now programming my ballet gala for the spring, and I'm looking at these artists, a couple of artists, about 4 artists that I don't know personally. 2 Chinese dancers that are currently dancing in Miami from the National Ballet of China. And I heard great things about them. I don't know them. I went on YouTube, and poof, there they were. So I could watch an actual tape of them dancing and evaluate for myself if these were artists of, you know, of the level that I want for this gala. There's a couple from Rio de Janeiro that I'm bringing in, or I'm trying to bring in, that I'd heard great things about, but I don't know them at all. And it was YouTube where I was able to pull up a lot of footage of them. You know, and it's all pirated, illegal footage of these people, but it's bringing these, you know, this art form to a lot of people who may not have been able to afford, or in the past think about going to a theater to go see these things. So I think it's been very impactful. On the flip side, on the legal side of things, it has generated a lot of discussion in the music industry and in the dance industry about copyright law. Who has the right to distribute images of or recordings of your work? And it's a very hot topic right now. There was a big lawsuit, which I'm sure you're aware of, with the Graham School when Martha died. Who controlled the works? And it was a really nasty fight. And for a good period of time, the world was at risk of losing her entire body of work until that got resolved. And the internet has been a big issue about copyright. Who owns this stuff? How much can you actually put? How much footage can you actually put on there? If someone downloads that image and they reset the piece, they need to pay. First of all, they need permission to do that work. You have to pay, reconstruction fees, and then there's copyright and performance fees that you have to pay. And so there's all those issues come into play with the internet, and it's an unresolved topic. I mean, the music industry is ahead of the dance industry on this, but it's become a big point of contention. Mm-hmm. There was an interesting piece that was done a couple years ago with the New School in Miami, and I want to say a company in Boston, and it was a interactive, via the internet, co-choreography improv that was done in 2 different cities, with 2 separate sets of dancers being given instructions. And there were videos that were being presented back and forth, live feed, real time, as this piece was being created with the 2 companies. It was a really interesting project. But that was totally made possible by the internet. Mm-hmm. The internet has also made it very possible for us to do work much more quickly. I book a company, and I said, I need, for instance, Patti LuPone. I know it's not dance, but I booked her 2 weeks ago, and the event is in a month away. I need immediate images. I need immediate text. I need all these things, so we can email high-resolution images much more quickly. We can download images of video images for what's called B-roll, that you would put on a TV station promo immediately. It's rushed a lot of the business side of presenting dance and music. It's helped us a lot. Every time a new technology comes out, I was like, how did I live without GPS? And before that, was, how did I live without the internet? And how did I live without an ATM card? And I remember when I got my first checkbook, I was like, how did I live without a checkbook? And now I barely even look at my checkbook. It's all done electronically. So it's interesting how it's all changing the field.
I assume from what you've talked about is bringing in all these international companies. How do you feel that that's influencing the American audience, the general population, seeing dance maybe for the first or second time? And do you see this becoming a global community?
I would hope it's becoming a global community. I think that we're developing a more educated audience by bringing in more exposure to art forms. The downfall that happens as a presenter is that typically in a city like Dallas, or really just throw a dart at any major city, very often people think if they haven't flown in on a 4-hour flight, they can't possibly be any good. So we take our local companies for granted. And that's a problem when you're developing a cultural landscape in a community. I think that the exceptions to the rule are New York, London, Paris, Frankfurt, these big sort of established cultural communities. People go to New York to see art. So if the company's from New York, they think they must be good. Well, there's a lot of bad art in New York. On the flip side, there's a lot of great art in Dallas, and there's a lot of great art in Fort Worth. But it's hard to get audience to go to some of these artists when they think, well, this company must be great because they're coming from Europe, or they must be great because they're coming from New York or Chicago. So it's a balancing act. As a presenter, I want to bring in the really cool international and famous companies. But you also want to try to find a way to support your local artists because some of them are doing great work. And you have to find a way to bring the audience into the local artists because they think they can't possibly be good. They're just from around the corner, and oftentimes that's not the case. So it's a catch-22. I think that we're building a more global community. I certainly think that we're breaking down a lot of barriers, presenting artists from different countries and really less important about different countries and more important that they're from different cultures. Is much more impactful. Also bringing in artists that are producing work that really make you think. We've brought in several companies that have bordered on offensive to people, and I'm all for it. If it makes them think, that's great. That's terrific. But there's a balancing act. At some point, it's like, okay, this is crossing the line in what is okay to present on stage. But we brought in my first year here in 2000. This was in 2002. We brought in Rennie Harris, a hip hop company, Pure Movement from Philadelphia, and he did a brilliant work called Roman Jewels. It was a hip hop version of Romeo and Juliet. Brilliantly crafted work. They brought in a dramaturge to work with the performers and infusing Shakespearean text with street language. There was a video image, there was a scratching DJ, there was terrific, freakishly unhuman dancers. But some of the language was tough. This was built on the streets. It was a modern day version of Romeo and Juliet, and there was some really harsh language. And as a presenter bringing in Dallas, in the Bible Belt, do I have to say, you got to cut back the language, or you can not have any profanity? And typically, I won't do that because I don't want to mess with the art form, or you shouldn't book them. What I ended up doing was a compromise. It's like, I don't need you to take out all the language. I just needed you to take out like some of the language. And I had some specific issues. And we agreed to do that. But I didn't want to tame the piece down because then it wouldn't be the piece that I had booked. And it created a lot of dialogue. A lot of dialogue. A lot of people loved it, a lot of people hated it, and that's okay with me.
How do you see dance crossing over with music and with theater and with art? Do you see a trend where the art forms are beginning to become much more willing to share, because we know that we see they see themselves as separate entities. Do you see more of a sense of coming together as a community?
I think so. I think it's the same thing that happened when the modern dance movement really started. People were looking for new ways to express themselves and break the chains of whatever their art form was at the time. So you see people now, the On Trio did a collaborative project with David Parsons. Parsons is doing a new project with East Village Opera Company that we have in our season, and they're building the work together. You look at Merce Cunningham, who had a lifetime, well, not a lifetime, but a very long partnership with John Cage, and they would build these pieces together. There are so many people doing that. Stephen Petronio did a piece with Diamanda Galas, and they built the work together. It's happening in the ballet worlds too, where they're commissioning new works, and the music and the dance are being created at the same times. There's also very, unique relationships, and Merce is the best example, where it was very common when he was building his early works with John Cage that he would have his discussions with John Cage about what he wanted and what the piece was going, and he would work with the dancers, and the dancers would not hear the musical score until dress rehearsal, the night before the opening. So the pieces were built separately, and then when they're brought together, you have, either chaos or, well, I'm sure you always have chaos, but you have a new work, and it would be, the piece is something completely different than what it was when it was separated. And so the artists, the dancers would have to find a way to make how they learned the movement fit with, or not fit, with the musical score. And it was a really interesting way of working. And more I see people that are doing collaborative projects with musicians. Trey McIntyre just did a project with Jessie Norman, and it was built in collaboration with her. Bill T. Jones has done it many, many times. He did it with, oh God, her name has just escaped me, but a couple of great singers that he's worked with, Joni Mitchell. Joni Mitchell just choreographed a ballet for Alberta Ballet. A musical icon, and who knew? She had a dance background. I'm sure it was done in collaboration with the artistic director, but she choreographed a ballet. Philip Glass, every modern company under the sun has worked with Philip Glass's music, excuse me. Steve Reich is another one that has been used time and time again because the work is so musical and it's so full of life and so danceable that everyone uses it. There's just so many of them. I mean, Joshua Bell's been doing some work with some dance companies. So yeah, I think again, it's the idea of revolution, people looking for new ways of expressing themselves. And for a musician, that may be finding a way to partner with a choreographer and be a part of a new work. So I think a lot of that is happening, and I think it's a good thing.
What would you say to someone that has not seen much dance? How would you get to pull them into your theater? How would you get them excited coming to see a dance performance? What would you tell that person?
I would tell them, that is always the question that we ask ourselves every day with being a presenter. For me, I think a lot of times people are afraid of dance. If they haven't had experience, they think, I don't understand it. I don't know what it means. I don't have any background. I said, it doesn't mean. Just go and have a good time. Go and watch it and experience it. It can be really fun. Now, I don't recommend everything for everyone. For the real non-dance person, I will say, come to Momix. It's so much fun. It's so physical. It's very gymnastic. It's a great show it's a great company to bring in a new audience. People loved it. Oh, I want to see more of that. That was a lot of fun. Well, dance is always fun. You can always have a good time. And they ask, always a new dance audience member at the Q&A will ask, what was this piece about? And typically, I would say 9 times out of 10, the artist will say, what did you see in the piece? And whatever that interpretation is absolutely fine. It's not right, not wrong. The artist might have had a different experience creating the work, but it doesn't negate the experience that any audience member might have in interpreting the work. I remember doing a piece called Rocks once, and I know where the piece came from. It was a study. This choreographer was doing a sort of a study of it. He had pebbles in his hands, and if you moved them around and how they hit, and this rock hits this rock, and it creates another reaction, and a reaction, and a reaction. And he was fascinated with that, the randomness of that. So this piece was built on that. And I remember an audience member asking at a Q&A what this piece was about, and Jose asked her, well, what did you see in it? And she said, oh, I saw the universe, and I saw pendulums and time and the universe folding. And he goes, well, that's great. It was so much more than what it was to him, and it was a terrific interpretation. So, you know, I tell people it's just try something different. Come in, you know, it's not about tutus, and so often people think dance, they think ballet and tutus, and not even ballet is all the time about ballet and tutus anymore. I tell them come in and have a good experience, have a good time, and you know, if you like this, you're going to love this other company. They're really interesting. And I will tell people, you know what, this may not be the show for you. This particular show is not the one for you. It's going to be real high art, and I don't know that you're going to like it. If you want to come, you know, come and enjoy it, but I just want you to know it's going to be really, really different.
Charles, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay.